So I would say that it's useful for people to know that in the late Roman period, the sort of the golden period of patristic Christianity, most Christians are illiterate, most Christians can't read. Most Christians' experience of Christianity would have been a liturgical experience, and that these simple everyday Christians were the majority of the church in the late Roman period, and they were a majority of the population of much of the Middle East into the, I'd say, 12th or 13th century. I think about medieval Christianity, medieval Islam, late Roman Christianity, and to do so in a sort of a more accurate way, we have to keep this at the front of our minds constantly. So a simple believer is just an ordinary everyday Christian or an ordinary everyday Muslim. And in the medieval Middle East and late antique or late Roman Middle East, most folks would have been illiterate. These were largely illiterate societies. And if you're interested, which I am, in the religious experience of everybody and not just the elite top 1%, so to speak, you have to think about the 99%. And so we have treatises written by people who are incredibly educated, who are profound thinkers, and these things have been studied to great depth by many gifted scholars for generations. And my question is, what would it have meant to be a Christian for a person who couldn't have read that treatise? So I went to Lebanon in 2006, and I met my dad's family there. And I met my great aunt Jamili, who's now passed away. And she's a beautiful, wonderful person. And she was illiterate. She was a Palestinian refugee in 1948. She was smart, and she could sort of sing poetry and all this sort of stuff, and she was great. But she couldn't read. And I remember having these, just talking to her about stuff. And, my family's Greek Orthodox, and she couldn't really move. She was old, and she couldn't walk very well. And so she would watch, for church on Sunday, she'd watch a Maronite Mass, a Maronite liturgy on TV. We were talking, I said, Aunt Jamili, you're Orthodox, you're watching a Maronite Mass. What's that? She said, it doesn't matter. Christ is one. Masih wahid. At some point it hit me, I had this hit me like a thunderbolt. Because I had always assumed that late antique Christianity was the Christianity of learned bishops. And it was the Christianity of these, there are scholars of patristic literature, of early Christian literature, who are phenomenally erudite, phenomenally learned, who are masters of text. And I had always assumed that late antique Christianity was like that of these scholars. I had this moment, I said, wait a second, what if late antique Christianity is like Jamili? And it made me rethink my whole approach to the late antique period and ask where is Jamili in my story? They never had the luxury of taking sort of Intro to World Religions 101 and having someone tell them these are the 5 things that it means to be a Christian, these are the 5 pillars of Islam or whatever. And so when you see, there's a medieval bishop who gives us, for example, a service for the baptism of the children of Muslims. And it's how to baptize Muslim kids. You don't give them a Trinitarian baptism because they don't believe in the Trinity, but you give them the baptism of John the Baptist. Asking why they might have their kids baptized, I think, leads to all sorts of interesting questions and thoughts about the nature of religious conversion. So the population of medieval Syria or medieval Anatolia or the early modern Balkans, the Muslim population, is a convert population. These Muslims are people whose parents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, whatever, were Christians. And when they converted to Islam, they may have converted for a variety of different reasons. And their conversion didn't necessarily entail their stopping all their previous Christian practices, one of which might be baptizing their kids. The history of the Middle East, religiously, is a history of, when I say Middle East, I mean places like Egypt, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, parts of Iraq. It's a history of large populations of simple Christians, and I mean simple in a non-pejorative way. I don't mean it to be simple-minded, just to be uneducated, illiterate. Could be very, very clever people, but just don't have formal schooling, converting slowly to Islam for a variety of reasons. And the confessional boundaries that scholarship tends to erect for a variety of reasons, and none of them nefarious, are often misleading and can obscure a very pragmatic approach to questions of religion I think many people had. And so that's what I would say.